Welcome to the Garden of Odin. This evening I'm going to show you how to make persimmon vinegar from wild persimmons that you can find growing in tree lines, along roadsides, along the edges of fields, in parks. Anyway, it's a wild tree or a native tree that's easily found and it has beautiful fruit on it. I'm going to show you a clip or a couple of clips of the persimmons on the tree and gathering them, and then I'm going to come back to how to make the vinegar. Here's another persimmon tree along a field edge. The persimmon crop seems to be really good this year. Again, the persimmons are high in, I think, tannins until the first freeze, for the most part. However, there are always some, like this one right here, that are soft, and the tannins are broken down. The sugars are available to use for cooking, making vinegar, whatnot. So that's why I'm out here picking some of these. Another thing to note is there versus under here. I don't know if you can tell, but the grass is all matted down. So especially in a year where there's a good crop like this, there are always some falling to the ground. And deer do like persimmons. It's a good source of carbohydrates. So those ones that have fallen are good deer food. But I've noticed this other times in other falls as well, but even more so this year, about how everything under the persimmon tree, or all the grass underneath the persimmon, seems to be smashed down or flattened out from deer bedding underneath here. They're like little pumpkins. A fall fruit with a lovely color. It's about 90 degrees today, and we've had a few evenings that have gotten down to the 50s, but we've had no freeze. But again, some persimmons will be ripe before the first freeze, and those will fall, and you can pick them up. But you can go through this nice little grove is an area to go through and find some that are ripe and ready to be picked now, so they're not bitter. The nice thing about these trees, they're not very tall, so I can reach up in there. Okay, I'm going to turn off the camera and start picking persimmons. Let me start by showing you this jar, which I started yesterday. I filled it about half full, and you don't want to fill it much more than that, maybe 2/3, because the fruit itself is a thick fruit. It's not real watery, and you don't seed it first, or I don't. I just put it all in the jar and smash it down. And because it's thick like that, it traps the CO2. Because it traps the CO2, I don't know if you can tell there, the gas bubbles in the product, it will raise everything up in the jar. Now you can take the cloth off the top and smash it down again. I don't think there's any point in doing it in a water seal or a sealed jar with a water seal. Just leave it open to air, because that way you'll get your secondary, after fermentation, you'll get a secondary change to the vinegar. So I've rinsed off these very soft, very ripe persimmons, and I'm going to put them into this jar. The nice thing about old jars that you can find at antique stores and flea markets and whatnot is some of them have a wide mouth. You can find new jars too. I just like having the old jars. make sure I don't want the stems in there. I thought I found all the stems and removed them, but I haven't. So you can see how soft this fruit is. And again, you can see that the seeds take up quite a bit of it. So in the end, I'll have at least one more jar filled about halfway to 2/3. And that will only yield me probably a quart of vinegar altogether. I even throw in the seeds because there's sugar around them too, and that gets fermented as well. Then, potato masher fits in there. You could use a stomper like you would use for sauerkraut, or you could use your fist. But it is kind of mushy and messy, so I like to have this potato masher instead. And add a little bit of water, but you don't really need to. There is water in here. It will ferment. There's a lot of sugar in persimmons, so you don't need to add sugar unless you add water just to get a thinner mix, a thinner, I don't know, mash, or whatever you want to call it. I don't cook it. I suppose you could add water and cook it and then strain it. You could probably run it through a food mill as well. But this is the simplest step, and it still gives a nice product. You can probably see here, it's starting to get softer. Okay, I don't know if you can tell, this is actually a pretty big persimmon, but it's nowhere near ripe. It's not going to go into my vinegar. This one is a little more firm, but still it's ripe. And one way to test, though I don't recommend it, if you can smash it like this easily, it's ripe. If you can't, I wouldn't taste it because these are so astringent. So you have to wait for the sugar to, you have to wait for the persimmon to change and start to ripen. And then that gets rid of the astringency. I don't know if that's tannic acid or what, but I'll put a few more in here. And then into this jar. It gets a little bit messy, but so do a lot of these other projects, as you know, that you do around the house. You can't find any good recipes for other things to do with these wild persimmons. I know there's I don't know if it's Shiner or some company that makes a beer with persimmons, which I think is pretty cool. But again, because of the nature of the fruit itself, apparently they get a really thick mash or something thick on top of it when they're fermenting. They have to strain all that off. If you run this through a food mill, just be aware of how big the seeds are. They're going to stick, they're going to clog up your mill unless you use one that has really wide pores. And I wouldn't use an auger type. I would use one of those flat ones that has a disc in it that you just turn to mash the fruit pulp down through it. And I don't know if you can tell, even on this screen, how much fruit pulp is in there. Okay. Now, a couple more thoughts about the pulp and everything that comes out of this. After it ferments, it'll change color. You'll have a persimmon colored fluid, and then you'll have a very pale layer of pulp and seed. And you can put that in your compost pile. However, just because this is fermented doesn't mean that the seeds are no longer viable. In fact, maybe it even increases the viability of them a little bit. So You can put it in the compost pile, but you'll have a bunch of little baby persimmon trees, persimmon seedlings. Then after this ferments, and I take all of the pulp out, I can do that before I let it become vinegar or after, but I don't have to worry about it rising in the jar anymore, and I can take, I can combine this. So I'm not going to be using up counter space with 3 big half-full gallon jars during the whole process. And that's just about it. And then just take a cloth that's permeable, tie it over the top, and it'll probably be done fermenting in about a week. We won't have vinegar yet, but the fermentation process will be done. Anyway, so now, there are my 2 jars I started today. The one I started yesterday, which is already showing signs of fermentation. And I just wanted to show you the difference between, it'll be much paler, a light color just like the persimmon when it's done. And then this is from last year, and it gets darker, but it clarifies beautifully. And just for a difference in color, again, this is pear vinegar from last year. You can see the mother in the bottom, I think. But again, this keeps more of a pear color than this darker persimmon vinegar. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. Comment, and if you have any questions, you know me, just ask me. I can explain a little bit more or help you find some persimmons. Thanks for watching.